What if one of Britain's most mysterious natural landscapes turned out to be a colossal man-made monument hiding in plain sight? That is exactly what a group of archaeologists now argues about a vast circle of ancient pits discovered near Stonehenge, and their findings could completely reshape how we think about this iconic sacred landscape. Researchers say a striking ring of huge, gaping pits found close to Stonehenge was deliberately dug by Neolithic people, using a cutting-edge blend of scientific techniques to finally settle a debate that has simmered for years. While Stonehenge itself is usually linked to the movements of the sun and sky, this newly confirmed monument, often called the Durrington Pit Circle, may point instead to beliefs about an unseen underworld beneath people's feet. The feature known as the Durrington Circle consists of a broad arc of around 20 massive pits forming a ring more than a mile wide, with the Neolithic sites of Durrington walls and Woodhenge lying roughly in the middle. To picture the scale, imagine trying to set out a circular boundary so large you could not possibly eyeball its curvature. Whoever planned this had to understand distance, position, and counting well enough to keep the layout consistent all the way around. Each pit is thought to be enormous in its own right. Some are estimated at about 10 meters across and roughly 5 meters deep, hewn into tough, chalky ground. Creating even a single shaft of that size would have demanded organized labor, stamina, and practical engineering know-how. Multiplying their effort 20 times suggests a community willing to invest tremendous energy in a shared ceremonial project. The circle first came to public attention in 2020, when remote sensing surveys indicated a ring of deep shafts encircling the Durrington area, prompting some archaeologists to describe it as the largest known prehistoric structure in Britain. The discovery also sparked excitement because planning something on this scale appears to require a form of numerical tracking. People would have needed some system, however simple, to mark out regular intervals and remember where they were around the circle, instead of relying purely on sight. But here's where it gets controversial. Not everyone was convinced these pits were human-made. Some specialists argued they might be natural depressions in the chalk, later exaggerated in interpretation by enthusiastic researchers. In other words, the whole idea of a grand Neolithic pit monument risked collapsing if the pits turned out to be no more than geological quirks mistaken for archaeology. To address those doubts, a new study published in the journal Internet Archaeology, aptly titled The Perils of Pits, pulls together years of follow-up work and concludes that the features really are artificial. The authors argue that the evidence now points firmly to deliberate digging by people more than 4,000 years ago, rather than random natural processes carving hollows in the bedrock. The research is led by Professor Vincent Gaffney of the School of Archaeological and Forensic Sciences at the University of Bradford, who describes the pits collectively as an extraordinary structure. He and his colleagues emphasize that the sheer size and depth of the features forced them to rethink how to study them efficiently, because fully excavating every pit would have been prohibitively expensive and destructive. Instead, the team assembled an unusually rich toolkit of non-invasive and minimally invasive methods, combining several types of geophysical survey rather than relying on just one. This multi-pronged strategy allowed them to map the shape and internal character of the pits beneath the surface, while keeping disruption to a minimum and preserving most of the monument for future research. Electrical resistance tomography was used to probe how deep the pits extended by measuring how easily electrical currents pass through the ground, which changes with soil type and moisture. Ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry then helped to define the form and outline of the pits, detecting contrasts between the infilled shafts and the surrounding chalk so that the team could model their three-dimensional structure. Yet these techniques alone could not conclusively prove that people dug the pits, because unusual natural features can sometimes mimic man-made shapes in geophysical data. To push further, the archaeologists extracted sediment cores, essentially narrow columns of soil, from different parts of the circle, allowing them to look at microscopic clues trapped in the layers of earth. Those cores were analyzed using a range of methods, including optically stimulated luminescence, OSL, which can estimate when grains of sediment were last exposed to sunlight. OSL is particularly powerful in this context because it can reveal whether material was moved and buried by human digging at a particular time, rather than left undisturbed as it would be in a purely natural depression. The team also applied cDNA analysis, short for sedimentary DNA, to recover traces of animal and plant genetic material preserved in the soil, offering clues about the ancient environment within and around the pits. By comparing these biological signatures at different depths and locations, they could see whether similar processes had occurred repeatedly across the site, which would be expected if people were systematically creating and filling pits as part of a deliberate design. Across the circle, the researchers identified repeating patterns in the sediment records that strongly suggest coordinated human activity rather than random natural formation. Professor Gaffney has argued that such consistency across widely spaced pits is effectively impossible to explain through natural causes alone, and he has gone so far as to say the team now feels confident they have nailed the question of whether the pits were man-made. The dating evidence points to the late Neolithic, placing the construction of these pits roughly in the same broad period as Stonehenge and related monuments in the region. Even so, the exact purpose of the circle remains elusive, since no written records survive and the pits themselves do not clearly advertise their function in the way a burial or a building might. One leading idea is that the monument may reflect beliefs about an underworld or a layered cosmos, with the deep shafts acting as symbolic openings into realms below the Earth's surface. In this view, the circle would complement the sky-oriented alignments of Stonehenge by literally inscribing a vision of the universe, above, below, and in between, onto the landscape surrounding it. Professor Gaffney has suggested that, now the pits are accepted as a coherent structure, they can be seen as a colossal monument capturing the worldview of the people who built it, carved directly into the land in a way not previously recognized in Britain. The fact that such a grand and conceptually rich design appears in the immediate orbit of Stonehenge reinforces the idea that this area was a focal point for sophisticated ritual, cosmology, and social organization in the Neolithic period. And this is the part most people miss. If the Durrington pit circle was indeed a deliberate, mile-wide sacred boundary tied to ideas about an underworld, it suggests that Neolithic communities here were not just tracking the sun but also grappling with abstract concepts like invisible realms, protection, and the limits of their world. That raises challenging questions about how advanced their planning, mathematics, and spiritual thinking really were, questions that may be uncomfortable for anyone who still imagines prehistoric people as simple or unsophisticated. So here's the debate starter. Do you find the new evidence convincing that these pits are unquestionably human-made, or do you think skeptics are right to worry about overinterpreting ambiguous data? And if the circle truly encodes a belief in an underworld on such a monumental scale, does that change your view of the people who built Stonehenge? Were they practical farmers with rituals on the side, or visionary astronomers and philosophers shaping the landscape as a living map of their cosmos?